PT Academy. I'm here, joined today again with Dr. Scott Stevenson. Now, we have had Dr. Scott on before. Absolutely awesome podcast episode that was. And if you don't know who Dr. Scott is, please rewind and have a look back at that first podcast episode that we did, because we covered a variety of different things, covering fortitude training, critical thinking, and so on, and also looking into his book, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach, as well. So again, brilliant episode we've got lined up today. We're going to be covering all things more training wise. So to get us started then, Dr. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me back on. Yeah, we had a good time last time. I'm looking forward to it today.
Yeah, we did. No, thank you very much for accepting to come on as well. It's awesome to have you part of like Velocity and talking to our students as well, and trying to and also other people that's listening. I mean, it's good for others to hear your knowledge, because I mean, it's vast, should I say, at the least.
I've geeked out on this stuff for a long time, so it's I've forgotten a lot, but hopefully I've retained a few things that are worthwhile.
That's it. Well, I'm sure even if it's in there somewhere, we'll be able to get that key to unlock it somewhere in that brain, that big Filodex that you've got in there.
Yeah, there you go.
So like I said, today we're going to try and keep it more training orientated. So the first thing that I've kind of got here is looking at different training systems. So and how you can implement them into your own training. So how do you select a training system? So I know yourself, Scott, you've created the Fortitude training system, the FTE training system. But prior to that, did you have any kind of were you following any sort of training systems prior to that, and it kind of morphed into something? Or so what's your experiences?
Yeah, I've actually covered that in the introductory portions of the book, sort of my training history. So I mean, I've been at this for a while. It's like 38 or 39 years I've been training.
Yeah.
So, I started off with sort of what they call bro split now, high volume. I just love to train. I just love sort of the meditative aspect of it. So as an athlete, et cetera, and I'll skip past a lot of that. And as far as me, I mean, I'm a bit unique in that I really, really like to train hard. And that's just something that I find intrinsically valuable and fun. And just worthwhile. I just really it's like every set, at least the big ones, it's like jumping out of an airplane for someone who loves to skydive.
Yeah.
For me, it's just awesome. It's fun. So that leads me to really the main, one of the main things that addresses this question for the people who are listening is, and I've said this, I may have even said this on our podcast previously, is that we are, to some degree, we're really sort of creatures of immediate gratification. People can delay their gratification. In fact, bodybuilding is about that to some degree. But in a large part, we do things because we find them pleasurable or rewarding.
Of course.
I mean, some people even say, there's like no true altruistic act. Like you do things that are good and nice and well received and charitable because it feels good to do that. Like if it didn't feel good, you wouldn't do it. So,
of course,
the training then has to be something that you enjoy as much as you possibly can. And like one of my favorite stories to kind of back up this idea, there was a guy when I owned a gym when I lived back in Arizona years ago. Right. And a guy had come in, he's late 30s, early 40s, middle-aged, needed to lose some body fat, kind of your typical male personal training client. And he started training with one of our trainers. The trainer was doing a great job with him, doing all the things you're supposed to be doing. But he was making some progress, but not so much. He just sort of really wasn't enjoying just going in and picking things up and putting them down. It just wasn't floating his boat.
Right.
And they tried doing more cardio. They tried doing more like even CrossFit types of things, circuit training. They tried it all. And finally, he actually wanted to sit down with me and to try to figure out what's going on. Like he thought maybe he had some metabolic issue or what have you. And there wasn't anything like that going on. And I said, well, I went back to like basics. When did you look and feel the way you'd like to look and feel in the course of your life? Has there ever been a time like, like when I was in high school, it was great. I loved, I was young, but I could never look that way again. I'm like, well, what did you do in high school? Exercise wise? It's like, I played soccer or football.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? He's like, oh yeah, I was like, we were a state championship team. It was really good. I would play it every weekend. I was in every league I could possibly. I love soccer. I still watch it, all the time. He's really big into MLS. So that's why I said, well, why don't you start playing soccer?
course.
And why are you coming to this gym? Like, that doesn't do you any good. Like, what are you thinking? Like, this is just sort of silly. You want to look and feel the way you do when you're playing soccer. So start playing soccer. There's some leagues like, yeah, there are. So fast forward, he actually stopped the personal training, and his trainer was okay with that. Like I said, I'm not trying to lose, get rid of your business, but came back 3 or 4 months later, and he lost all the weight he wanted to. His eyes were bright. He was happy. He was having a blast. He was playing soccer on the weekends. He was getting his kids involved. He was playing soccer at night after work, looking forward to it, not dragging himself to the gym. So for some people, like, going to the gym may not even be the right program for them at all, if we think big picture. So, and then otherwise, sort of narrowing it down, some people, for instance, won't, although they might, if they could somehow be hypnotized into training with incredible focus and desire and mental intensity and fortitude, they might do better with a certain type of training regime that was sort of optimized physiologically for growth and muscle and strength, et cetera. But if they don't like to train that way, it's not going to last very long. Adherence is the bottom line, really. So they may be someone who likes to get a good pump in the gym. So that may be more important for them. CrossFit is how big is CrossFit there?
It's quite big. It's getting, your box gyms are opening up, especially within your bigger cities now, and they're getting licensed with the CrossFit licensing.
Okay.
So yeah, they do have the regionals and everything over here as well. So I would suspect that it is probably bigger over there in the US at the minute, because you have the whole games and everything. So, but I'm not kind of in that circle, but I'm just looking at it from an outsider's point of view. It is quite. It's growing, should I say. Your box gyms are getting big with your barbells,
And there's a reason for that. I mean, you can criticize it from, a programmatic standpoint. It's pretty random, the things that they do. It's kind of hard to improve all those different aspects of fitness, muscle endurance, strength, et cetera, all simultaneously. So it's sort of non-focused from a sport specific. There's the injury risk. You can go on. We do a whole podcast just on picking apart CrossFit, but it ties into that tribal nature, that desire to be part of a group. And there's tremendous social support, which is a major component for exercise adherence. It's fun to go in there. And if you're someone who likes to train really pretty hard, and the encouragement is tremendous there, they have a great sort of community, from what I've seen, for the most part, that you don't see in bodybuilding, probably because bodybuilders can, not so much in the UK, but definitely more so in the States, I think, can be very egotistical and narcissistic, et cetera. Like they're not going to share their secrets and that sort of thing.
That's it. Coming into the gym with your headphones on and your hood up, and that's it. You're just focused on one thing, for example.
And that could be okay if, like, everyone was of that mindset, but just the CrossFit thing is phenomenal for some people. So that for them could be the perfect program to choose. So that's really the main. In the long haul, those are the main things as a program that you like. Now, some people like to log their training. Some people like to be very particular. They'll go in the gym, they'll scratch it down on paper, then they come home and they put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and they like to plot things out. And they're like a body engineer, so to speak. They really like to that's part of what makes it fun for them, is to track and to analyze, and maybe even overanalyze. But that's fine. And some people just like to go in the gym and get a really good pump and just go after it and get as much of a euphoric feeling as they possibly can. So really, that's it. I mean, that's, like, I think the question, as you phrased it here in our brief sheet, is what variables are important thing about when selecting a training system for your own training. Those are the main ones. Yeah,
because it poisons adherence, doesn't it? At the end of the day, if you were to give a client who barely eats 2 meals a day, but you were to give them 5-6 meals to eat, but they're not used to eating that, they're probably going to fail, because they can't adhere to it, because it's too much of a change. And if it's full of foods that they don't enjoy eating, they're not going to do it because they don't enjoy it. Exact same principle comes with exercise. I always try and say to others, the student trainers that we have, exercise doesn't mean that you have to strap on your trainers and walk to the gym and do that commute. It can be basically anything, like you've said. Your guy who enjoyed soccer, then he gets the family involved, and then all of a sudden now you've created a good family dynamic, and it's more than just exercise to him then. So definitely more. But if we think of it more in a gym sense, then Scott, so we we'll look at it in terms of kind of like training systems, so like training frequency and so on. So we've got why do they need what is the biggest point? Well, they need to enjoy it, they need to adhere to it.
Right.
And then kind of what next? So we've found a strategy that they enjoy.
Right.
What other
I know where you're
things?
going. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
You want to know like the specifics of the science of creating a
yeah.
hypertrophy based resistance training program. So one of the first things, well, first of all, goals are super important.
Hmm.
So, and I'm not trying to backtrack back into like the big picture stuff,
Yeah, no, it's good.
but sort of goals are like where are you trying to go?
Uh-huh.
So if someone comes in there in like they're 160 pounds soaking wet and they want to be a professional bodybuilder.
Hmm.
They want to get as large as humanly possible. They're going to have to realize that they're going to probably have to get incredibly strong and move some massive weights in the gym. Those things are going to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to pick a program that is going to be oriented in that way, I think.
Hmm. Yeah.
There's incredible biological individuality as well in terms of just basic things like how much someone can recover.
Hmm.
So the way I set up fortitude training as just a basic template was with the flexibility of 3 different training volume tiers.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I've had people that I may have mentioned this previously on the other podcasts we did. I've had people who, like, one guy was literally almost pro caliber and he trained like an absolute animal and he could only recover from the lowest volume tier. Whereas another guy was a natural competitor
Hmm.
who had different kind of genetics and he could train at the highest volume tier and recover. He wasn't anywhere near the caliber bodybuilder of the other guy, but
Yeah.
he could actually train and they both trained really, really hard.
Yeah.
So rigid programs that don't have any room for auto-regulation or variation or deloading as needed
Hmm.
are probably don't suit many people. So linear periodization can work in many cases, but you're going to have to be able at least be able to change the program based on what's going on. And that's the thing that so many people. It's sort of it's an interesting psychological phenomenon because people will defer their common sense to the authority of the person who knows and created the program.
Of course.
So
Yeah.
they'll just follow a program for 12 or 16 weeks, however long it runs, and destroy themselves.
Hmm.
Do way too much, make no progress. Whereas if they knew, like, you know what, I can move back, I could drop back the volume here in half, or maybe I shouldn't be trying to do skull crushers because from the first rep on, my triceps tendons feel like they're about to split in half.
Yeah.
But people will not do that. On the other hand, if a program is well designed as best you can see it, I'm also big on, at least especially this goes for fortitude training, trying the program out until it becomes very, very obvious that something needs to change. So do your best to stick with it. And I've done that in the past where I've like, I'm going to give something a try. I don't have a sense that it's going to actually be productive, but I end up learning something every time from doing that.
Hmm.
So you gain experience and you gain a better ability to sort of cultivate your own programming.
Hmm.
So the big picture is being able to auto-regulate those things, and that could be something that can be very, very individual, even when it comes to different muscle groups. A lot of people will train legs less frequently than they do upper body. Calves, for instance, can be trained very, very frequently. Many cases. Some people train calves every day, or every day they can get away with, like literally 3 or 4 times, or 5 or 6 times a week.
Yeah. But,
so that's important. So recovery is really paramount. So and there's an interaction with what you enjoy doing and how you construct the program and your recovery. So some people, I've had this happen a lot with fortitude training. It's a daunting thought for those who have never tried to do a full body program. And there are many. It's amazing how many more full body training systems are out there now, or training approaches are out there now compared to when I first put out fortitude training. I don't know if I had anything to do with that, but because it had been around for a long, long time. Old school bodybuilders were training full body 3 times a week, decades ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you don't like the idea, like, okay, today I have to do calves and quads and hams, legs. I'm training everything today. that's a lot. I would rather just focus on like my back and my delts or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Then that makes more sense because that's the type of training you're going to be better focused with.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be able to better dig in on those sets, more motivated to move forward and apply a progressive overload, which is another obvious basic training principle that should be in place, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, your volume per exercise per training session would be higher when you're training fewer muscle groups, because you'd probably be training them less frequency. So if you have like a 4 or 5 way split, kind of a more of a bro split, you'd train more with higher amount of volume each of those training sessions.
Yeah,
but maybe not quite as much volume over the course of a week.
Mm-hmm.
So a way to distribute that is that people can play with is consider the weekly training volume, or whatever a sensible block of time is.
Yeah.
And then take those 12 sets and do I do 6 sets twice a week? Do I do 4 sets 3 times a week? Or do I do 12 sets 1 time a week, for instance?
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing about training more frequently is that in some cases, people find they can get away with a little more training volume. There's a meta-analysis by the newest one by Schoenfeld on training frequency, and it seems to suggest that there's an advantage there when they dug into the data in the higher frequency regime, and that you can get away with training with higher volume if you spread the volume out over the week.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, and I've heard of that done before. Like, look at it over the course of a week rather than, say, for example, that one session. Same with like training programs and training splits, rather than trying to fit your whole training split into a 7-day course that's nice and mathematically nice in your head. Try and think of it over a longer period of time. So then you're not almost like just always training a certain specific muscle on a certain specific day, for example. Just whatever you adhere there to.
We have circadian rhythms that fit with a 24-hour cycle, but they don't necessarily fit with a 7-day week.
Exactly.
I mean, they do in that, the lunar cycle matches the menstrual cycle, but I don't think, men aren't figuring, okay, this is 1/4 of the way through my menstrual cycle.
Well,
so
if men are thinking that, then I think they might need to scratch their heads and go back to the drawing board with it.
That's definitely overthinking something.
Yeah.
So you can take the volume and figure out what you like to do better. Maybe you want to train everything. You want to go in there and you really like that idea of obliterating a muscle from every angle possible on a given particular day.
Yeah.
And there are thousands upon thousands and thousands of people who have grown really well from that. Most professional bodybuilders train with a kind of a bro type split. Most professional bodybuilders obviously have really good genetics too.
Of course. Yeah.
That's another topic that I have a theory as to why that is the case.
Right.
It's related to satellite cells and growth factors and those sorts of things. I think there's something going on there with the extreme responders such that a given training session creates an adaptive response that's prolonged over the course of like 5 or 6 days.
Right.
So that they can get away with that. They get a better response in terms of growth factors that turn on satellite cells and the remodeling than someone who's a non-responder. And there's research to back that up.
Right.
So,
yeah. You always think,
actually.
Yeah, we can have a look at that because I always think of like great responders. You think of like Kevin Levrone, for example, just like when he did that comeback in Olympia. It's like you're thinking that he used to take a whole year off, go off, do singing, and then come back, and then all of a sudden be able to blow straight back up. And you're thinking, right, so that there's definitely something there that makes him different to other people. There's got to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most people are not all of them. There are people that have to sort of fight, tooth and nail over the course of decades to get a pro card. But even then, they're pretty good.
Yeah.
I've got a talk that I give. I think I'm going to give it. I think this is one of the talks I'm giving in Scotland at the end of November. When I'm there.
Hey, do you want to shout that out whilst you're on here because it'll be released for when it goes live? Yeah.
Sure. traperformance.com. It's where you can get tickets. It's I think we called it like a fortitude training super seminar or something like that. So
cool. Awesome.
One day is all fortitude training. It's the camp, and that's actually full. There's a 2-day package, that's already bought out. But the second day, I'm doing a variety of lectures.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what's the date of that, Scott? So
It's the very last weekend in November. I can't remember which days
right.
those are exactly.
So UK guys that are listening, last date in November. Dr. Scott's in Edinburgh. So make sure that
Yep.
you're if you're listening, you enjoy it. Don't miss out on that one.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. It's there's a phenomenal. I think I've heard from everyone who's bought the 2-day tickets through
Right.
Instagram or what have you. That's going to be just a badass. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
There's something to say. We can go to this frequency idea. So one of the things, like, well, in that talk that I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
I went back and looked. It's like the 2016 Mr. Olympia, and I traced as best I could through the competitive history of the top 10
Right.
in that show.
Yeah.
And on average, they were turning pro in about 2.5 or 3 years from their first competition.
Gosh, that's quick.
Pretty fast.
Yeah.
It's pretty fast. So that obviously says something. Like, they got to that level. I mean, Sean Ray looked as good as he almost ever did when he was like 20 or 21.
Right.
And you can look back at old pictures of Jay Cutler, for instance, where he's wearing like the pinstriped spandex pants or the striped, and he's 21 and he's as big as he ever really got.
Yeah.
Wasn't quite as refined, but so that growth comes on fast.
Yeah.
There's something to say for that. And the data, there's the data that have looked at, there's some data that have parceled out not non-responders, moderate responders, and extreme responders.
Right.
One of the things that extreme responders seem to have in common is a high density of satellite cells in muscle biopsies, as well as they get a more substantial response in the growth factors that set those satellite cells into motion. Right. And the satellite cells are important because, generally speaking, like, this is somewhat controversial, but the general idea is that, at least probably for the course of really massive muscle growth, as a muscle cell gets larger, muscle cells are multinucleated. So they're very, very big cells in the grand scheme of things. And they have to have multiple nuclei in order to produce the proteins and all the things that are involved in the nucleus's regulation of cell metabolism. Mm-hmm. They're basically, the nucleus is the factory for producing all the components that keep the cell up and running. Yeah. So you have a really big cell, you need lots of nuclei. If you want to get a bigger cell, you need even more nuclei. Uh-huh. Those satellite cells are basically muscle-specific stem cells that are on the periphery. They're like satellites, just like satellites that would orbit the Earth. Yeah. And when muscles grow, the satellites will differentiate, or they will replicate themselves, make a copy, and then differentiate into what will become a muscle myonucleus. Right. And then make their way into the cell and become a nucleus in the muscle cell. So if that doesn't happen, some of the older models, there's some problems with it, but they would, for instance, you could irradiate with gamma rays muscle cells, so that you can't do that. Basically, you damage the nuclear machinery for the replication process, and the muscle cells don't grow. The muscle doesn't grow unless the satellite cells can do what they're supposed to do and increase the number of satellite cells. So those extreme responders start off with more satellite cells, right? And they also have a more robust response to a particular training bout to turn on the satellite cells and put them into motion. Right. And as far as I can find, I've only been able to find one paper, and I go back and I look often again, but it's a paper with eccentric muscle damaging exercise. So satellite cells are also involved with muscle repair. But the increase in satellite cell activity lasts about on the order of like 5 or 6 days. Right. So it's almost a full week. Yeah, yeah. So if you've got someone who's gifted as far as muscle growth, a responder, and they undergo a training bout and they get a really robust response to everything turning on the satellite cells, that's going to last, as best I can tell, more than half a week, close to a full week. Yeah. So they've set into motion with one training bout a process that's continuing for a week. Yeah. Whereas someone who's not a very good responder as they've increased those growth factors, they set that process in motion, but not particularly well. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's possible that there's some sort of a threshold for turning on, because it's a big commitment for the cells, for those satellite cells, to make a copy of themselves and undergo everything that I just mentioned. Yeah. That's a huge investment in energy and restructuring of the ultrastructure of the muscle cell. So it's not like, it's like starting up a business. Like we're gonna put a whole nother business in place here, and we're going to build it from the ground up. It's like, you don't just say, let's just build a building. Like, no, there's a lot of things that have to go into that. So if the stimulus for turning that on isn't very strong, then you may not be enough even to bring about that satellite cell proliferation and differentiation that needs to happen.
Yeah.
So my thought has been then for people who are non-responders, and this is substantiated by people who have taken a high frequency approach to training, like with calves or whatever stubborn muscle group they have. And it could be that poor response it's somewhat genetic, and maybe it's just they can't train that muscle group very well. Like their training stimulus is crappy. They just don't have a good mind-muscle connection. But for whatever reason, maybe they set a little bit of that satellite cell activity into movement over the course of one training session, and then it kind of would peter out, very, very short. It never really reached the threshold to get anything going. But if you train more frequently and create sort of an additive effect, whereby you're continually sending a signal that's a little bit weaker, but at least it's more noticeable. It may add to some degree and superimpose upon itself over the course of training every day or every other day as opposed to once a week in a way such that you do get the satellite cell activity and you do get the muscle growth. And that's what people who have found that a high frequency approach for lagging muscle groups tend to find.
Do you know what? That totally makes sense from what you said there, and relating it to the high frequency approach for guys that may need to do that. Whereas, like you say, your more gifted guys, your guys that you probably see up on the IFBB pros on the stage, they might be just doing the bro split because of what you said. It's almost like they may only need to train a muscle once a week or something, but that gets it in circulation where you almost get that graph and a nice little periodized line goes up for those satellite cells that you talked about, and it's causing that increase just from, not saying they will train hard and they will train intense when they're doing it, but through that molecular kind of look that you've given there.
And and who knows? I've heard people say, and I think this is a stretch, like that if things like if Dorian Yates trained differently, or if Ronnie Coleman trained differently, and or so and so trained differently, they would have been bigger. I don't know. There's probably multiple ways to get to the same amount of sort of penultimate muscle development. But those guys who grow, if you grow really well from a bro split, and you grow to be one of the best in the world, or at least pro caliber in terms of muscle mass, why would you change anything?
Exactly.
It's been working for you, right?
I'm sure if you asked, if you told that to Ronnie Coleman and Dorian Yates, they're probably like, well, I've achieved everything that I needed to achieve, so why would I do it different? I was Mr. Olympia for eight times, so why would I change?
And the thing that's interesting about Ronnie, though, is Ronnie actually did train with a relatively high frequency. He trained with a 3-day split 6 days a week.
Right. Yeah.
So he's an example. He was actually doing pretty high frequency. And the thing that I find ironic, I remember when people talking about, I was around before Ronnie turned Mr. Olympia. I remember that being a really exciting Mr. Olympia because Dorian was gone and he was going to step in, and all of a sudden Ronnie came out of nowhere. And people like being interviewed, other pros being interviewed and saying, how did Ronnie do this? It's like Ronnie just can do shit in the gym that nobody else can do.
Yeah.
And it's true. People could not do the volume and the frequency combination that Ronnie did. In a way, you could maybe say Ronnie couldn't because it really broke him down in the end. I wish someone would have been paying closer attention. I think some of that could have been prevented. Just have the sense, And I say that just as someone who's been brutalizing himself for over 30 years too. But the thing that people did not take from Ronnie's approach is like, okay, well, I can't handle Ronnie's regime, but what is he doing differently that I could perhaps be doing? And he was training everything twice a week. Maybe I can do half of Ronnie's volume and still train with that frequency. Maybe that's the key. I can't train with his. Maybe people were trying to train with his half of his volume, but that's because the frequency was only half. They train with the same workout for legs that Ronnie might do, but they only do it once a week versus twice. Maybe it was the frequency thing that was missing, and that was the mentality because so many pros are doing it a certain way. You just trained that way. It had worked for them in many, many instances, almost all of them, because they're going to be the extreme responders. Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of set that up. The high volume, Arnold Encyclopedia, that really etched into people's mind. That was sort of a turning point away from some of the old school full body routines. So, and plus it's fun to train that way. You go in and you pick the, the clothes that are going to show like your arms best, and everything else, and cover up your legs when it's not leg day, and you show your legs when it's leg day or whatever.
Yeah.
And what do you do if it's full body? Like, I don't know what to do. I have to have like a series of clothing to change.
Just walk around in an all spandex suit and just kind of just be like, right, there we go.
I don't know, right? So
compression.
Yeah. So
that's awesome. That kind of touched us onto the next part. I know you mentioned it already there, Scott, but an element of exercise execution for certain individuals as well. So if you get in, I've heard it and I've had it many a times where you have a client and, for example, they're always complaining that they may be doing a bench press and they're becoming more shoulder and tricep dominant. They're feeling it on the shoulder and triceps compared to actually wanting to do it on the chest. Another example that I've had before is, well, I know because I've kind of been through it myself, wanting to increase my chest size, for example, and strength, and then just thinking, right, all I need to do more is bench press, my pressing movements, without actually having to step back and thinking, hold on a minute, if it's not up to scratch where I want it to be now, it's probably because I'm doing the movement wrong, not that I should be doing more of the incorrect movement.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. As Ronnie used to say, you keep doing what you've been doing, you keep getting what you've been getting.
Yeah, great saying. Yeah.
And that goes for the good stuff or the bad stuff too.
Yeah.
So
what kind of have you got any like triggers or any kind of like advice on anybody that's wanting to improve their execution of certain exercises? So we'll take the bench press, for example. Oh, you're not a big fan of the bench press, are you, Scott? So should we choose a different exercise?
You can pick whatever. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I don't do a lot of benching just because it tends to cause shoulder and pec injuries a good bit, and I can actually feel it. I'll do a Smith bench press now and again, but not heavy stuff. So
yeah. So we'll do that for example's sake, just so then the listeners can kind of envision it probably a little bit better. So let's say they're doing it and then they're just feeling it in the wrong areas. So they're feeling it in the shoulders, they're feeling the triceps are burning out on it compared to what they're actually wanting it to be on the pectorals. So if we start with kind of like mental triggers, have you got any kind of mental triggers to run through?
Yeah, there's so much there. I have actually like 2 talks that I can put together on finding like the executing the perfect rep.
Yeah,
is one of them, and it touches on things you just brought up, and then the whole mind muscle connection on top of that. So I'm going to step back first before we go in there and say it's sometimes some exercises are just not going to work for certain people. They're just not. And bench press is a great exercise for pecs for lots of people. Not everybody, but many, many people. And it's funny because this is one that gets bantered about all over social media. It's like, why is that guy doing all this heavy bench press? He's going to tear a pec. It's like, because look at his pecs. It works phenomenal for his chest. It's a great chest growing exercise for that person. So if someone's just starting out, they may not be able to develop a mind-muscle connection in anything, really. They may not feel, there are people that are so sort of, I called them motor morons in the past. That's the term I picked up in grad school somewhere. Like we're doing like a knee extension.
Yeah.
And they're looking down at their quads and they can't identify which muscle is doing the exercise.
Right.
It's just like that disconnected from their body.
Yeah.
So to expect someone like that to sort of deactivate the anterior delts and the triceps during a bench press or a pressing movement is a huge leap because they can't even look at a muscle and it's only one muscle that can possibly be doing the activity and they still can't tell which one it is.
Yeah.
So, but there's something to say for trying those basics that have worked, like squatting. I squatted for decades, literally, before I sort of figured out it's not getting me what I want. I tried all sorts of variations. I can do it in a Smith machine, and it does get me where I want. But a barbell, most of the time, no. But I gave that decades of a try, and what that does is it does get you to like have some steadfastness and stick-to-itiveness.
Yeah.
Because the issue may not be the actual exercise; it may be just that you need to figure out how to make the exercises work for you.
Yeah.
But after a couple of years, or however long, it makes sense, then it may be just the exercise needs to go first and foremost.
Yeah.
So, but let's say that you do have an exercise that's so let's say it's a bench press or maybe even machine press, and that exercise is one that's, for instance, there's a loading curve for every exercise. So over the course of the range of motion, it will load differently. If it, for instance, has a cam hooked up to it. If it's a barbell, then basically you've just got gravity, which is the same throughout the range of motion.
Yeah.
But the relative, if you've got a compound movement like a press like that, generally speaking, triceps are going to be greater and more engaged at the end of the press, chest more so at the beginning and in the middle. So for someone who is trying to use that exercise to train the chest, a loading curve that matches the strength curve, especially a loading curve that matches the strength curve with someone who's got a really good mind-muscle connection and can turn off the activity in the triceps, relatively speaking, and make the chest or the pec major the main mover, the prime mover for that exercise. The exercise or the machine that matches that strength curve when someone is really good with a mind-muscle connection, those are the machines that feel phenomenal. Because they match what you should be able to, what would happen if you just use your pecs. And you could basically, which you can, of course, entirely, but it can be relatively done. And there's studies that are out there demonstrating this is the case. That you can tell, even newbies, you can tell them, do this bench press and use your pecs more so than your triceps. And that is indeed possible. Or the other way around, use your triceps more than your pecs. So that has been demonstrated. And one of the things there, and getting now towards the idea of tips and tricks, assuming you picked a good exercise, is that people tend to lose the mind-muscle connection when they go too heavy. And and it's about 80% of a 1 rep max is what the couple studies that are out there suggest. And some of that is like basically makes sense. If you're at 100% of a 1 rep max for a movement, then you're using 100%. It's 100% activity in all the muscles involved. So you can't have a mind-muscle connection 100%.
No,
it's not really 100%. Right.
Exactly.
But when the weight is lighter, you can have less activity in those accessory muscles and still move the weight and perform the reps. What you would expect then is reduced performance. So if you do, say, set someone down or a group of subjects and say, we're going to figure out what your 10 rep max is on this exercise. 10 rep max using everything you got, just put everything into it, without breaking the rules of form for the particular exercise. That's going to be a heavier load than if you say, now I want you to do the exercise for as many reps as you possibly can, or for a 10 rep max, using your pecs as much as possible and everything else as little as possible. There should be a difference there. And what happens over the course of time, and I have been guilty of this for decades myself, is people will say, well, if I'm going to make the muscle bigger, I have to get stronger. There has to be progressive overload. So you may start a training cycle or a program or what have you, and you got a really great mind-muscle connection. And you're using, a load that's relatively light because you've got a good mind-muscle connection, and some muscles aren't being activated as they would be if you just lifted as best you could. And then you want to increase the weight. Of course, you want to progress. And you can progress simply by calling upon those accessory muscles.
Of course you can,
making you stronger. And you could, like, over the course of a blast or a training cycle, a mesocycle, what have you, you could increase tremendously just by doing that, and have done nothing in terms of the size and the strength, therefore, of the muscle you're trying to target. And that's a very difficult thing to be, because that's a subjective phenomenon of how well you're sticking with that mind-muscle connection.
It is. It's like how would you measure that as well? It's very difficult. You've intrinsically got to have a look at yourself and just be like, right, after that set, okay, I did shift more numbers out and I did get more reps out, but was that targeting what I exactly wanted it to target? I've been guilty of it myself. I mean, for example, when I started looking at Jordan Peters stuff, and I just instantly just saw intensity beating the logbook. I initially thought, right, bang, that's what I need to be. And then that exact same scenario happens. Like, you start throwing everything that you've got into the exercises, that all of a sudden you're thinking, I just did a barbell squat then. I could not tell you what hurt more, whether it were my legs
Right.
or whether it were my back or whether it were my, do you know what I mean? So
Yes.
it's that risk, that almost like benefit to risk ratio that you want from those chosen exercises and selecting those muscle
Right.
groups. Yeah.
So one thing is going too heavy,
Yeah.
or trying to force progressive overload. That I haven't seen that studied directly, but that's sort of an obvious thing. So many people like you and I have
Yeah.
both done that. And if you try to move the weight too quickly, so if you try to do an explosive type of movement, because that requires that you call upon more motor units. If you try to move the weight as fast as possible, then you can use as much muscle as you possibly can engage to move that load, which basically defeats the whole purpose of the mind-muscle connection.
Yeah.
And make it limited. So those two things have to be in place. The other thing that could be really, really helpful is visualization or mental imagery. So there's a number of things, but this is a big one, and even literally there's been some pretty cool research studies done where they've had people just visualize exercises, just visualize movements in the gym, and you can increase strength just through that alone, with no training whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. So is that almost like mentally trying to work through those like motor patterns in your head and just be like,
Yes.
like almost like trying to, you almost hear of it in sports as well. I know like over here we have football, like strikers may visualize hitting the back of the net prior to going out on the pitch, and then it kind of like rolls onto that. That might be a little bit different, but
it's
in
the same
terms
body
of
of
you're
literature.
trying to get that motor pattern in your head sorted out almost, and connect with it more.
Right. So the mental practice should be coupled temporally, so time-wise, pretty close to when you actually do it. So you should visualize it, see it happen in your head, and then do it thereafter. So in the case of a set, like for instance, chest has been a weakness of mine too. Many people, this is the thing you'll typically hear. It works for most people, not everyone, but most people, is if you retract the scapulae, and literally think about when you're holding the bar, if you have a bar, bringing your hands together like it's a fly, or even trying to touch the inner part of your elbows together, the antecubital space, like this, as opposed to that. This becomes a tricep movement. This becomes a pec movement, just anatomically speaking. So when you have all those cues in place, shoulder girdle retracted, triceps deactivated, squeezing my hands together, arcing movement, like some of the best chest movements are arcing in this nature.
Yeah.
Because that arc is literally entails shoulder horizontal adduction, at the shoulder. That's what the pec does, right?
It is. Yeah, if you think of the insertion and the origin, moving it both close together, that's what you want to do.
That's the action, anatomically speaking. So you can see all that in your head, and you can see yourself performing that perfect set, literally. And this is just sort of something that I will teach clients, and I've been both in the gym and otherwise online. Is see the set and see it coming to that brutal, fantastic climactic end, where your rep is just slowing down to like that, that grinder where you're just barely getting there, and you don't do this. You don't. I don't know if you can see my arms in the screen. You don't engage the triceps. Everything that you did on that first rep in terms of keeping the mind-muscle connection in place, all those cues stay in place. And that first rep looks just like the last rep looks just like the first rep, except it's slower. And you stay mentally focused. You see that happen. So once you've done that once in your head, then you actually do it. And you've got, basically, it's kind of like, it's not quite exactly the same, but it's sort of like if you looked at a pattern and you looked at it long enough, and now I look over here, it's like, does the pattern match? Well, you have a mental memory of what it is that you just looked at. So you have a mental memory that you've created, and literally they found through EEG that the motor cortex areas of the brain involved with those movements get activated during the visual imagery.
Brilliant.
Like literally, you're training the neurons that are firing together, are wiring together, literally, as if you were doing the practice itself and the actual movements in your brain. So when you get in and then to actually do the set, you've already experienced that. You already know what it is. So you have, especially if it's right afterwards, you have an immediate check to say, okay, that's not what I was supposed to do. That's not what I just did. I just cheated. And I didn't want to be cheating. It wasn't part of my strategy for the set to make it a cheat. They add cheat reps in at the end. That could be something else. So the mental imagery, I think, is a really important one.
Yeah, no, that sounds perfect. I've heard it before as well. It's when you kind of get to that point during the end of your rep, it's like, what? Why do you want to throw everything that you've just done away by, for example, that example, locking your elbows out? You've tried so hard to get to that point of metabolic damage during the
Right.
set. Why chuck it all away by cheating? So you might as well just complete
Yeah.
it as you actually wanted to do it. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. And
yeah,
you'll just like, because, well, a lot of times because the logbook's there and you got 9 reps
that's
the
it.
previous time and now you want to get 10.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and it's not really 10 if you did things differently. You've done a different exercise because you've added
yeah.
that accessory activation and the cheating there at the end.
Yeah, and that's it. And it can
Yeah.
be so easy as well, Kat. It can be so easy to just think, have that
Hmm.
motivation to just think, right, I've ticked that off right now onto the next exercise or onto the next
Right.
session, and then you're just kind of walking away with a smile on your face because you believe that you've done more. But
Yeah. Right.
evidently,
Right.
yeah, it's that.
Um, there are a couple other things. One, you can, and this is just general for exercises, is initiate the movement with the targeted muscle that you want to
Right.
make the prime mover.
Yeah.
So when you start that chest press, it should be initiated with the pecs. And there was a particular study where they had people doing kind of a posterior leg lift, like a hip extension exercise,
Yeah.
and they asked them to use the hamstrings, which is the hip extensor, or the glutes,
Yeah.
and basically to use the hamstrings in one round and then the glutes in the other round as the main mover for that hip extension.
Right.
And one of the things that they found when people were successful with that is that there was a timing difference, that they
Right.
literally were using the glutes first. The glutes were activated first, and the hamstrings became involved thereafter
Right.
when they were asked to use their glutes. So that's something that I think too you can use at the end when you get to those grinder reps.
Mm-hmm.
Is if you see the weight starting to slow, it's like, okay, no, I'm not going to let the weight stop. I'm gonna initiate more movement with the weight with the prime mover,
Mm-hmm.
not because those muscles are fresh. If you've done a
Yeah.
good job with your mind muscle connection, the anterior delt and the triceps on a pressing movement like that, they're ready to roll.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
could bang out a ton more reps.
Yeah. Just take over, can't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, there's more. I
All
can keep
right. Well,
going.
yeah, we'll keep going. I love it. Yeah.
Pre-fatiguing.
Ah,
There's a couple of things
yes.
you can do.
I've heard of this.
So that helps. It's an interesting. There's a phenomenon there. This is a little bit of a kind of hobby horse with me. So one of the things that happens when muscle fatigues is there's a phenomenon that's called muscle wisdom,
Right.
and basically it's a reflexive spinal cord initiated phenomenon where fatigue muscle requires only a lower frequency of firing in order to get a nice smooth tetanic contraction.
Right.
It becomes fatigue muscle is slower. If you've ever
Mm-hmm.
like seen anyone do E-stim or maybe at a TENS unit, and when you first turn it on, the muscle just jumps right into a contraction,
Yeah.
and then when it's been on for a while, it becomes kind of gelatinous. It becomes literally slower
Yeah.
in terms of contractile properties. Well, the nervous system knows this, and what happens when muscles fatigued is the firing rate goes down.
Right. Yeah.
Because there's no point in sending frequency signal down at 30 hertz when 18 hertz will do the job. You're just going to waste energy in the neurons releasing neurotransmitter and taking it back up. So what happens, or what you'd expect during an EMG, is that in fatigued muscle, the total EMG activity would go down, or the root mean square EMG activity would go down.
Mm-hmm.
That's a natural, normal phenomenon. So when they've done some of the studies looking at pre-fatiguing to see whether if I do some pec flies or a pec isolation movement before a press,
Yeah.
does the idea of their thinking was, well, if we've now made the pec the weak link, then we'd have increased EMG in the pecs,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's having to do more work.
Yeah.
But the thing is that it can be maximally activated or at the end of a set, for instance, but it's more fatigued because you pre-fatigued it, and now the EMG would actually be less because of the fatigue effect.
Yeah.
And the two studies that I'm thinking of, actually the EMG was the same.
Right.
They said, oh, well, the pre-fatigue didn't work. It's like, well, you didn't take into account the fact that you would expect a lower EMG, all other things being equal, because of this muscle wisdom phenomenon.
Of course.
So pre-fatiguing does, in my mind, even though those authors don't conclude that, the literature doesn't. If you read the abstracts, you don't necessarily get the same conclusion as I've come up with. is it does create a weak link. And you see performance decrements too. If, just as I said, if you've made the pec the weak link, you've pre-fatigued it, instead of getting 12 reps, you might get 8 reps.
Yeah, performance would go down. Yeah.
That's good,
Yeah.
because you pre-fatigued the prime mover.
Yeah.
Exactly what you want to do. So what that does is it does make just like the mind muscle connection does make the target muscle the weak link. It also creates a practice and a biofeedback effect. So like if you do pec flies and do superset with a press of some sort, and you're getting basically because let's say you really fatigue the pec, that you literally the pec is, regardless of how much you end up sort of violating your mind muscle connection principles, you still end up with a premature set, because the pec is so fatigued. Well, then you know what that feels like. You practice that. And when you go and you try to do other exercises, maybe where you don't pre-fatigue, you know how that should feel. You should be feeling the stress, the metabolic stress, the lactic acid. Everything should be in that muscle that you've made the target one, and the other muscles should feel relatively unaffected, just as they do when you pre-fatigue. So you're getting more experience as to how this is supposed to feel. What's supposed to happen. There's another phenomenon too, and this, you don't even need the pre-fatigue, but doing an isolation movement like that, you can. There's something called post-activation potentiation.
Right. Yeah. I can't say I've heard of that. No.
Oh, I think I've got an article on Elite FTS. I know I wrote it, but I don't remember if we ever published it. But so if you do some very brief, the research suggests sort of moderate intensity contractions, not a whole lot, just a few reps. The mechanism isn't entirely known. It may be phosphorylation of a protein called myosin light chain, which is associated with myosin heavy chain, which may increase the myosin heavy chain's affinity for the actin, or in some way it potentiates force production. So they demonstrated this with e-stim. They sent in us a couple bursts of e-stim, and then when they send in a standardized electrical stimulation train, you get a higher force production. And they found this with athletes. Like if you do I think this is what a lot of sprinters are trying to do. You'll see sprinters who are getting ready to get in the blocks, and they'll do those jumps.
They'll do that. Almost like the bounding jumps.
Bounding jumps. I think they're trying to create a post-activation, after activation potentiation effect. So now those muscles, just because of that pre-activation, so to speak, will produce more force.
So is it a similar example, for example, Scott, when you see a powerlifter pull on the bar before they actually do the pull, for example? So have you ever seen like a powerlifter get down for a deadlift? And then it's like they'll go for almost like a half pull just to understand the weight and get the muscles firing prior to then going.
That could be underlying that. I mean, some of that is, I think, psychological too. It's sort of about the psyching up and feeling the weight. If you can get down there and you pull on that weight and you rattle it around a little bit. It's like that bar's my bitch, basically, and it's going to go up, as opposed to, because the last thing you want to have go through your mind, and I'm not a powerlifter, so
me neither.
Anyone thinks I'm not speaking out of turn, but I know I've done relatively heavy lifting, and the last thing you want on that first rep is when you pick the weight up to feel like, oh shit, like, oh my God, I'm going to get crushed. That does not behoove you well for what you're trying to do.
You want no doubt in your mind during that.
So I think that sort of is part of a psych up and a way to sort of, get a kind of a literally a grip on the weight that you're about to do, to make sure, you can, this is yours, you own it. So what you could do if someone doesn't want to pre-fatigue for whatever reason, and this is just me speculating, but I just think it may be something that would work, is if you can do some warm-up reps that way, one that practices gets you aligned with making the target muscle the one you're going to train. You've done some reps just to sort of train the idea of using your pecs instead of the other muscles. But you may actually get some post-activation potentiation. So now when you're lifting and you're applying good mind-muscle connection, mental strategies, your cueing's all good, now you're getting more force because you've potentiated force with those previous reps during your actual working set. That's a damn good thing. Now you're creating a greater mechanical tension stimulus on the muscle because of that. And so, because people are like, well, if I pre-fatigue, then then I'm not getting as much load during the training. It's like, well, this is one way that you can actually do like some previous exercise, not pre-fatigue so much, and maybe not sacrifice the loading as much. You actually get greater relatively loading. So now you've taken the force production of the pecs, let's say, because you just did a pec activation exercise previously, and you get, let's say, 120% of the force you would otherwise. It's not quite that much, but you get that, and everything else is the same. So now you've basically made your pecs stronger.
Yeah, essentially.
That's a good thing.
That is,
and it loads heavily.
Yeah,
so.
Get that stronger contraction involved into it. You're onto a winner, aren't you?
Yeah. So there's like tips and tricks for all the muscle groups and way to perform the exercises. It's one of the things I think I am doing when I'm at Edinburgh. Is going to go in the gym and kind of show people the ways that I've sort of figured out that work for a lot of people. Not everyone's the same. Not everyone will be like, like some people really, for them, it might be better to have some protraction.
Yeah.
And not always have retraction. For extra shortening of the pecs.
Yeah.
But a lot of people who can't get good chest development have really strong anterior delts, relatively speaking. They're delt pressors or they're arm pressors. For those people, setting up posture in terms of the scapular retraction is a winner, and that's most of the people who need to figure out how to train their chest better. If you're not a delt tricep presser, then you're a chest presser, and you don't have any worries with mind muscle connection because it comes innately to you.
Yeah,
you're good at it in the first place, so you don't have to do anything. So it makes sense that the most commonly applied strategy is for the ones who can't get their chest to be the prime mover. So that's why that's the most frequently suggested approach, I think.
No, that's cool. And do you also think, Scott, as well? Do you know when guys are looking to improve on certain weak areas on the body? I think you mentioned it somewhere in your book. Just also thinking about, right, okay, you want to gain X amount of mass on this body parts. I think in the book you said an inch on a flexed bicep. Well, you've got to also holistically think it's not just the biceps that's going to need to just gain muscle here. It's going to have to be an overall mass production that's going to have to take place.
Yeah, that's such a, like, this, I get the question, so it's on the arms. Yeah. Someone's been training for 4 or 5 years, and for like the last 2 years they've gained 2 pounds. Which maybe not even 2 pounds. It just happened to be 2 pounds heavier on that particular day versus 2 years ago when they knew what their weight was.
Yeah.
And they think that they can, magically apply some sort of training principle to get arm growth when arms are stubborn muscle growth in the first place for them. Overall, most people will gain arm size. Just you put on 30 pounds of fat-free mass of muscle, some of it's going to go to your arms.
Yeah, you'd think so. Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to be a larger version to some degree of what you once were. You can change your proportions, obviously. You can bring up weak muscle groups. That is not entirely unheard of. But if someone starts off and they're just really bottom heavy, let's say their legs are just tremendously large, and they train everything equally, then they're going to end up a larger version of that to some degree.
Yeah.
And so you can bring the arms up to some degree, but yet in the end all, like, that's the thing guys are wanting to. Who doesn't want to be lean all the time, right? And look good.
Yeah.
And it may be, especially, this is the conundrum. This is the issue, is that for those weak muscle groups, you're going to have to do everything you possibly can to bring them up once you've been training for a period of time. So whereas if you gain, let's say, the 30 pounds of, over the course of like 5 years, you devote yourself and let's say you gain 20 pounds of muscle mass, and arms are your weak muscle group. So you might get, let's say that just works out to be like an average of like a 10% increase in whole muscle cross-section area or volume overall,
right?
For that person. Well, you might only get 5% from the arms because they don't want to grow. It's just they're stubborn. That's how they are. Yeah. So you're going to have to like really push to get the arm size.
Yeah.
Because everything else grows relatively easily for that person. So yeah, putting on the weight overall is important.
It is. And I think, do you mention somewhere as well in terms of like either eating more a day before and a day after that potential day that you're training? Is that one element that you could do? So say, for example, somebody has got weak arms, or let's say
Right.
we'll go arms. Um, nutrient wise, in terms of food, would you, for recovery purposes and also energy, would you pack that more in around the training days for that specific muscle group?
Yeah, I think I have a big. I think there's a frequently asked question in there on weak muscle groups. So
Ah,
one of
yeah,
my
yeah.
goals, I think. Yeah. So yeah, I went into pretty good detail. Um, so yeah, you want if it's a weak muscle group and you're like literally that is an absolute utter priority for you in a
Hmm.
way. Like let's say like every time a bodybuilder's gotten on stage, it's like they're like you look great, but you have like these little spindly arms. It doesn't match the rest of your body. You have to make the arms come up.
Hmm.
You would try to orient everything about your training and your recovery and your nutrition
Yeah.
around training that muscle group. So that could be splitting up the frequency, as
Hmm.
talked about, to try that approach. All the mind muscle connection types of things. Making sure that you may have a day off before you train those weak muscle groups
Hmm.
and then a day off afterwards.
Yeah.
So you come in fresh, you can train as hard as possible, and then you have an extra day of recovery.
Hmm.
Same thing with your food. So if you're eating to make a in a caloric surplus, let's say in this case this person's got legs that the legs recover no matter what. They
Hmm.
don't when they diet down, they never lose any leg size. Legs are just going to stay and they're going to grow really really easily.
Hmm.
Legs can suffer in terms of recovery
Hmm.
and in terms of food. So if the average for the day might be 4,000 calories over the course of the week,
Hmm.
and eating too much more than that means gaining excessive fat mass relative to the muscle you can gain. You're going to just be putting on scale weight too fast.
Yeah.
You can take that 4,000 calories. Think, okay, well, leg day, that's okay. I can train legs just after I've trained back. It's no big deal. I don't feel that great, but I'll get it done with legs. I can
Hmm.
maintain legs on once a week
Hmm.
and lower calories. So that might be a train legs and have 3,000 calories that day.
Hmm.
I'm making this sort of extreme. You wouldn't necessarily do
Yeah.
all that, but let's say the person does hold on to leg mass that way.
Hmm.
They don't need any more leg mass at all. So then that gives them an extra 1,000 calories to play with during the rest of the week.
Hmm.
So they may find that they don't need the extra food before training arms.
Hmm.
Doesn't seem to make a difference for training arms. But so then they want to make sure they're totally recovered after arm training. So they add an extra 500 calories on those 2 days a week they train arms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, on those days, or maybe 250 that day and the day thereafter, which is a non-training day.
Hmm.
So now they've taken that 1,000 calories and they put that into fueling, so to speak, recovery after training the arms.
Yeah.
And arms have priority because of the way the nutrients are distributed throughout the week, the way the training, with the rest days are distributed throughout the week, and all those
Yeah.
sorts of things too.
Yeah.
And so something else suffers to some degree. In this case, the legs, but the legs don't suffer because the person's genetically suited for having big legs. It's not an issue for them.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah,
And they've got to that point in training. And again, this is sometimes where experience, when you, through getting your years in and through years of trying different training systems and understanding how your body works out, you won't know that your legs might not suffer. So it's,
right.
yeah. So again, it's understanding your own body as well, and just being like, right, well, I know that for example, my shoulders won't suffer if I tend to lower down nutrients on that day, and they'll be okay. Whereas I can do it on a different body part, but you won't know that if all of a sudden you've done 6 months worth of training in the gym and all of a sudden you want bigger arms.
Right.
So, do you know what I mean? So it's again getting your experience in as well, and it kind of comes full circle as well. So if you talk about a guy that's just come off stage and he needs to get bigger arms, then again it's taking a step back. What have we just talked about? Looking at the movements, looking at how the connection with the muscle is, looking at how you're training it, along with these principles of nutrients and recovery and stuff as well.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing, generally speaking, though, we do know there's a study that was done in older folks where they looked at sort of what a maintenance dose is for maintaining muscle mass that had been gained previously.
Hmm.
Bickel was the first name on that, first author on that, Bickel. Scott, who went to grad school with him.
Yeah.
Um, And we know this from endurance, sort of detraining literature with endurance training is that if you maintain intensity of effort, so RPE or relative VO2 max, or you still train hard, you can drop the volume down and still maintain gains that you've had.
Right.
So someone who, and from a practical standpoint, let's say someone's been training legs twice a week, what have you, and they're squatting 500 for 10 and they're leg pressing 800 for 12 and et cetera, et cetera. Those are their training loads. If they can then cut that back to once a week, say the same volume per session, and maintain those strength levels, they're going to pretty much maintain the muscle mass that they have. So even if you don't have that experience of like, well, my legs hold size no matter what I do, you can bank pretty well on the fact that if you can keep your performance in check, in place in the gym with reduced volume, you're going to keep the muscle mass. You once had.
Because you're kind of giving the muscle a reason to stay put, aren't you? Through lifting that weight for X amount. So that's maybe not as frequent, but you're still giving it that reason to still be there.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, there's one thing too. It's funny that you mentioned this about, learning that mind-muscle connection being important. There's a guy, probably the best member on my discussion board.
Right.
And he's been doing fortitude training for forever. And he's got a log that he hadn't updated. And someone popped into his log and said, "Hey, where you been, man?" Because he's been on there for years.
Right.
And he had stepped away and he started doing, this is something I encourage in my Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book. He started doing I think maybe he's done 2 of John Meadows' programs, which are higher volume. And one of them was arms oriented. And so he was doing a lot more arm work, a lot higher volume arm work. And the thing that he noted, and this guy's a very savvy trainer. He's a really smart, very nice guy, super smart guy, and he loves like breaking things down the way we have been, try to figure out what works for him. And he found that doing that higher volume allowed him to have a better mind-muscle connection with his arms, he felt.
Right.
And it's more practice.
It is. You
know, if you're doing a high frequency regime and you're only doing like 1 or 2 working sets, twice a week, which may be kind of good to a certain degree from just recovery and growth overall. Well, that's not a whole lot of time sort of under the load, sort of under the dumbbell in this case, training those muscle groups. You're not getting as much practice. In fact, it may, from a practice standpoint, it may even be better to train arms like every day. I knew a guy I went to grad school with who bench pressed every single day for years. He didn't know he wasn't supposed to. So
every day?
Every single day.
Oh gosh, what were his bench press at the end of it? What could he max out? It must have been.
He was actually, he ended up being I think he placed like 3rd in the collegiate nationals when he was in college.
Really?
A while ago, And he would just go down to bench press in his basement when he was a kid, and eventually he probably weighed about 160 at the time when he benched 315.
Crikey.
So you know pounds, I can kind of say that.
2.2 pounds to a kilo. So,
So that's like 140, 145 kilos, something like that.
Yeah, around that ballpark figure.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
His
twice body weight. He cried literally. He said when he finally got 3 plates, 45-pound plates, he literally broke down because that had been something he'd been striving for years. But he did that every day. And so from a muscle recovery standpoint, and I'll tell you another story, even a better one, to illustrate this point. Maybe that was a bit much, but he was young, and the guy could eat too, so he was eating a lot to recover. He's a pretty calm, relaxed dude, so I'm sure he's sleeping. He's not high strung, so I think he had good recovery. But one of my favorite stories in this regard. So one of my best friends, she was a champion swimmer and tennis player growing up. I've told this on podcasts before. And so her parents really, they cultivated sort of almost like a superhuman in her. She scored a perfect score on her SATs, which are one of the college entrance exams when she was like 14.
Awesome.
They were both an educational psychologist, so they basically sort of made into a genius and a super athlete all at once. And so they would get up in the morning, and depending whether it was tennis or swimming, and they'd do some land work if it was swimming or some just cardio aerobic training. And her dad figured, well, we should probably do some upper body strengthening. We'll fit something in here. So he had like a bench press in the. He was not really a sports scientist. He just sort of figured it out as best he could. and they bench press, I think, in their garage and in the house somewhere. So she started bench pressing when she was like 5 or 6.
5 or 6. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a motor pattern she started ingraining from a very young age.
Yeah.
When her nervous system was really developing. And when I got to know her, she was in college, and she just was a regular college student. She'd go out, she'd play tennis and swim, and she'd work out, but nothing big, nothing competitive in the least. But her bench press was phenomenal. Right. So she'd walk into the gym at the rec center. This is University of Georgia, and she'd lie down on the flat bench, and just throw 135 on there for her warm up. Yeah. She could bench press 2.25 for like 8 reps.
That's not bad going, to say that she wasn't competitive at all.
No, she was 150 pounds, maybe 140 pounds. She actually she bench pressed in the gym like 275 or 285, and she was slightly intoxicated too. It was like a gym lock-in thing where they lock everyone in the YMCA. She was in there just eating, and I'm going to go bench press and see what she can do. It's kind of probably stupid to do.
Yeah.
But it didn't carry over.
Right.
So she was pretty good at like rack deads and those sorts of things just from sheer willpower. But her overhead press was normal. She wasn't any stronger on overhead press than what you'd expect for someone her size, and looked how she was. It was just that she had learned the form and the activation patterns for bench pressing tremendously well from having done it for so long. Mm-hmm. And she was ridiculously strong. So there's something to say for doing maybe higher volume training, or literally you can periodize your volume and frequency, which is what this guy's done. And it's funny because a lot of people say, I'm going to fortitude training for life. I love this program. I'll do it forever. I'm like, don't do that. No, there are other things can happen. Simply changing stimuli can lead to new growth. And this is one way in which that can happen, is someone who goes and does, 12 sets for biceps, 12 for triceps, or what have you.
Yeah.
And they're doubling the number of work sets that they're used to doing. Now they're doubling their practice and figuring out how to really tax that muscle completely in a way that they hadn't before. Mm-hmm. And so then they can bring that back and perhaps employ that in having a better mind-muscle connection when they're doing a lower volume type of approach. So.
Yeah, exactly. And even like training with different rep and set schemes, you don't know what carryover that's going to have for maybe when you come to do some strength work. You've got a better cardiovascular capacity and things, and so on, with different training systems.
In fortitude training, one of the things, there's loading sets, there's muscle rounds, which people know the most about, although they are almost always done incorrectly. If you look on Instagram,
I've seen all your videos trying to like nail it into people, right? This is a muscle round, this is how you do it. Yeah.
People, they come up with all these strange things. It's almost like they're just trying to see if they could perturb me. Like I try to do my best. I just don't want people to be confused. It doesn't matter what, I want people to do whatever they want to do. And there's nothing magical exactly about how I did it, but just want people to like, not so am I supposed to do 5 reps or 4 reps and how many sets and what's the rest of them? But there's loading sets, which are very heavy sets. And then there's pump sets. Yeah. Which are lighter, and they're excruciating. You can push yourself pretty tremendously during those, and in a way that a lot of people aren't used to having done previously. Yeah. You sort of load everything into that set, and that creates a muscle endurance effect. It also can kind of reset your pain threshold and maybe even your pain tolerance for what's difficult. So when you're used to doing like a pump set, let's say you go through 15 or 20 reps, and then you try to do like 10 pulses, where you just kind of hang in there, keeping the weight moving until finally, like, you have to put it down. Yeah. For that, like, 15 seconds of agony, that's something pretty excruciating that you're going through on a regular basis. When you go back and start doing those heavy loading sets, where those sets are always continuous. You're not like squeaking out reps by pausing and doing more. You get to the end of the set, and the last maybe 3 or 4 reps are tough, but they're not as painful as what you've been doing. Mm-hmm. So you can, that pain isn't as distracting. It's not taking you away. And pain does literally at the neurological level inhibit motor output. Right. Makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
So, and of course, psychologically too, you're like, oh shit, this hurts.
Like protection mechanism.
So you can develop both a muscle endurance, probably a neurological phenomenon. There's probably some neurological adaptations, which I actually probably should look into that. I've got a friend who's a pain researcher. And then there's, of course, the psychology of well, I got 2 more reps here. I'm going to just keep going. And like, this is nothing. That 2 reps is maybe 5 seconds
Exactly.
compared to, the 15 seconds at the end of that pump set that I did a couple of
Hmm.
days ago. So there is carryover from one to the other,
Hmm.
I think.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It makes sense. Definitely.
Yeah,
Well, I think we'll pause it there, Dr. Scott, if that's okay.
sure.
I think that's a awesome episode, and we've covered a variety of different things: training, mind muscle connection. I mean, we've got a plethora of different subjects that we've kind of covered there.
Yep.
So if the guys that are listening, we've got your book here again. Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach.
Yep.
Hard copy. Go out and buy the hard copy. If people are wanting to buy this book, Scott, where's the best place for them to do it?
Amazon,
Amazon.
amazon.co.uk. Is that the?
Yep, correct.
Yep.
Yep,
Yep.
yep. So we've got Amazon where you can get that. Look to get the hard copy, and also you've got your Fortitude training
Yep.
system as well. So where's a place where people can look to purchase that?
All the URLs go to the same spot, but
Do that.
fortitudetraining.net takes you
Yep.
there, I think, still.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that's just $20. It's just an ebook at this point.
Yeah, I can
So,
say it's definitely worth it, especially if you want in the more training side of things. It's got a lot of training science in there as well in your Fortitude, where you've really broken it down in your ebook. It's a really good resource to have, and also try it out at the same time.
right.
And if people want to hit you up on social media channels as well, Dr. Scott, have you got your Instagram and
Yeah,
YouTube?
fortitude underscore training. I haven't done much on YouTube. I probably should, but the Muscle Minds podcast that I do every
Yes,
other week, Scott McNally runs that. It's on the Think Big
right.
podcast network now. He's sort of switched over to that. It's make kind of rebranding. But you can find the YouTube on there. And we do them, as we mentioned before, we do those on Facebook Live.
Yeah, they're on Facebook Live. I can't recommend those enough as well. If you enjoy listening to this one, then go over to the Muscle Minds one with Scott McNally, and you cover a
Yeah,
ton of stuff on there. I've been a listener for a long time and thoroughly enjoy
thanks,
it.
man.
Yeah,
I'm gonna start doing some. I think I've got a new idea that actually hit me this morning when I was
yeah.
up making breakfast, and yeah, I'm gonna start adding some cool stuff, like a little bit of a segment. So I think I'm gonna make it even better, as
Oh,
opposed to
nice.
me just kind of rambling, which obviously I love to do. I'm a prolific rambler,
Yeah,
but I think I've got a little bit more of a focused theme that I want to add, which I think people will
cool,
like a bit. Yeah,
cool. Well, I'll listen out for that as well in future episodes.
cool.
It's been awesome. So,
Yes,
apart from that, we'll stop it there. Thanks a lot, Dr. Scott.
you're welcome, Ben. My pleasure, my man.